Uh-huh. Please just confirm in the comment section that you can see my screen. Just confirm in the comment section that you can see my screen. Just put in this, just type yes, yes in the comment section that you can see my screen. I tried looking at the YouTube now. I'm seeing the face of one man there. All right, all right, all right. Please let's keep it coming. We are start annotation again. Please let's try to coordinate ourselves. Somebody here is annotating. Let me delete all. Clear all drawings. Delete them. Zoom meetings. Annotation. Okay, done. All right. Thank you all once again. In the next couple of minutes, the training will commence fully. In the next couple of minutes. Okay. Like I was saying the other time, this is not a fresher training. It is for those who understand the basics, who have gone through the basic training. So if you have not gone through the basic training, you might want to try going for the basic training. However, in sometime, I think sometime later this month or next month, we will also be doing a free ISO, but this time around it will be ISO 45001, a free ISO 45001 training with certificate for everyone. So, but this particular focus now is on transition, meaning that you understand the initial requirement, you know what it means, you know the details of the initial requirement, and you are now transitioning into the new requirement. What are the changes? What are the ups and downs? What are those things that you need to add? What are the focus area? This is core. This is core. This is a core transition training. This is a core transition training, and what it means is that we want to look at the differences. What are the differences between the existing requirements? What are those things that makes it different and unique, and what are those things that we have now? What do you need to implement when it comes to these new changes that has been put in place in order to ensure sustainable practices and to integrate our processes and to make it in line with our high level structure that we have when it comes to the ISO standard. Yes, that is the focus. So that's what we are looking at, and that is the detail of our transition training. That is what we want to talk about. That is what we want to emphasize on. And in by 5:20, this training will commence fully. Even though I'm already speaking about the training, I won't by 5:20 there will not be distraction. I'll be going straight into the business. We'll be going straight into the business by 5:20. Just in 2 minutes time, we are going straight into the business. Like I said, if you're unable to join, you can, if you're unable to join, please kindly watch live on YouTube. Yes, yes, yes. Everybody says that they can see my screen. Yes, we are about to go down. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for your patience. If anyone again can't join, please inform the person that such person should please join the YouTube channel, and they will also be eligible. So now, introduction to this particular class. This is ISO 40001 2026 transition training, looking at the key changes, looking at what are those things that we need to now put in place, and how do we transition ourselves, and what do we need to do as process owners, as organization, as environmental experts, as auditors. What are those things that we need to look out for, and what are those extra things that we need to start auditing? What are those facts? We'll be going into the detail of even what are those little changes. As little as it is, I'm going to mention it in this class. It might look like, why do we need this information? Yeah, it might look little, but It was a deliberate effort, deliberate research to look side by side into the two standards, the 2015 standard and the 2026, and we read through, like practically reading through, not using artificial intelligence, reading through with some of my colleagues, and we look at what are the from the scope of the document, that is clause 1 to clause 2, to normative reference, to terms and definitions, down to where we have the old clauses. So this class is basically focused on that. And like I've said, this class will be a class that certificate will be issued, but there is a process to the certification. The number one is your attendance all through the class, because at some point in between the class, I'm going to scan the QR code. Let me also, so I'm going to show you the QR code that you're going to scan, and I'm also going to share the link. I'm also going to share the link on. I'm going to share the link on this on the Zoom platform, and also I'm going to share it on YouTube. Mostly on YouTube, it might only be the QR code. So if you don't capture the QR code and have access to the exam, because you are going to take a brief exam, 20 questions, that is the 20 questions are focused on all what we'll be talking about. They are not something that are hard. So it has been programmed automatically. It has been programmed automatically. If you score 14 out of the 20, you automatically move to your certificate. So you write down your name and you download your certificate. If you score below, you might not be able to take the exam again. So it is one. So it is not just a class for you to attend, for you to listen and get certificate. It's a class that you also need to pay attention to, jot things down. That is what I tell all of our delegates at Coral Safety. I tell them, don't just attend classes because you want the certificate. Attend classes because you want to gain knowledge, you want to build capacity, you want to achieve something from that training, and from there, your certificate should be an evidence, just like we used to talk about it in clause 7.5 that talks about documented information. In many areas of the ISO standard, you will see statement that talks about uh, documentation, so and so should be available as documented information. All of these statements means that it is not that you should put document first. Document are evidence that you have carried out a particular activity. So document comes as secondary. What comes as primary is you implementing that process effectively, and that is what we are going to be talking about in this class. So this class, once you after the class, in between the class, I'm going to open the QR code. Once you open the QR code, you have access to it, and you ensure that it is the email that you used to to do your assessment. Because once you click on it, you click on open assessment. Once you go to assessment, you do your exam. The email that you input in that particular in the Google form, in the assessment, when you are trying to download your certificate, is the email that you use. If you use a separate email, you will not be able to download your certificate. These are the basics that I say I should inform you about, because we do not want a situation where people start complaining that they are not able to get the certificate. They are not. No, the process is very simple and straightforward. Use the same email that you use for your exam, to take the exam. Use the same email to access your certificate, and ensure that you score 14 out of 20 questions. They are simple questions that only those that are in the class will be able to answer those questions. So let's get right into it. If you are ready to go, please just type fire on in the comment section. Just type fire on for me to know that yes, we are ready to go. Let us go, 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 let us go. So now this training again is on ISO 14001 2026. And like Engineer Jami, we always say, tighten your seat belt. We are about to take off. and we are about to start this training session. What do you want to achieve from this training? You want to understand what are the structural changes. We are not only looking at the elementary changes or the implementation changes, you're also looking at the structure of the standard. The truth is, you don't need to be scared. You don't need to be worried. If you are a process owner, you're like, 2026, how do I need to go about it? What do I need to put in place? No, you don't need to bother yourself. You don't need to stress yourself. Many of these requirements are things that are already ongoing. Many of these requirements are things that we are already doing. And even the structural changes, many of them are just repositioning, rearrangements, and proper structuring of some of the clauses. Though there are some new specific changes that are not much, so you don't need to bother yourself. Just put yourself at rest that transitioning into 2026 is as simple as ABC. There's no big deal about it. Don't make it something that, in fact, many of us are already doing this already. So we are going to talk about understanding the structural changes of the clauses, identifying new definitions and terminologies. Like I told you, we also be looking at terms and definitions. We also be looking at terms and definitions in these terms and definitions terms and definitions. In these terms and definitions, we are going to look at some of those new definitions and some of them that they have removed from the definition. So it's just a place for you to know that, okay, there's a reason why they remove this definition and there's a reason why they compress these definitions. Then compare 2015 versus 2026 requirements. We are going to go through some of those requirements. If you have the two ISO standard with you, please, if you have the two ISO standard with you, you might want to open them for this purpose. If you have the two ISO standard with you, you might want to open them for this purpose. If you have them with you, you might want to open them for this purpose. Most especially the 2026, that is where our focus will be. Then apply life cycle thinking principles. When we're talking about life cycle thinking principles, what are we talking about? What are we what it is that is what is the interpretation? What is the interpretation when it comes to this, to the 2026, and what do you need to add to it? These are part of things we want to achieve at the end of the class, at the end of this particular class. Then also prepare for transition auditing. These are also part of what you'll be looking at. How do you carry out, or how do you prepare for auditing when they want to audit you into the new standard? How do you go about it? Then this training is for EMS managers, coordinators, internal and external auditors, environmental compliance officers, top management and leadership, consultants and trainers, and everyone who wants to build a life or build organization using the process of ISO 14001 environmental management system. There are basic knowledge that we need to know. We should need to go back to the journey so far. What is the overview of this standard? This standard was published on the 15th of April 2026, and the transition deadline, meaning that organizations have a 3-year period. That is why that is why all our ISO certification, that is one of the reasons. Let me say why. That is one of the reasons why our ISO certification spans for 3 years. So it's not that immediately next year they'll start telling you that you must be 2026 certified. No, there's a transition period. It's a continuation. It's a fluid process. It's not water flow. It's not immediately you must do this and you must do that and you must do this. No, it's in process. It's in progress. So let us understand these basics. Then in 2023, this was where the revision began for us to revise this standard and see what we can add, what we can remove from it. Remember that our ISO 9001 is also 2015. Our ISO 9001 is also 2015, and our ISO 45001 is 2018. So now this is now a kind of bringing a new structure in which others will definitely align with it. So the high level structure still need to be maintained, but year in, year out, reviews will also always come up. There will be recommendations. Sometimes even me myself, I look at the standard and I see some things and I'm like, can this want to revise to this to make it easier? Anybody can come in as far as you have the knowledge, and your input are always welcome when it comes to the ISO standard. When it comes to the organization, inputs are always welcome. So this review has started since 2023. The first draft came in 2025, and by January 2026, the final draft was released before we now have the officially published ISO 1001 2026. And this, like I said the other time, it takes a 3-year transition period. 3-year transition period. Now, what has changed? There are some amendments that we are going to talk about. We're going to talk about some amendment. For example, in the initial standard, you'll be seeing terminologies that talks about outsourced processes. You'll be seeing terminologies that talks about outsourced processes, outsourcing. Outsourcing is a term commonly used when it comes to procurement processes. Outsourcing is one of those terminologies that we use most of the time. You'll be seeing, for example, in clause 8, you'll be seeing statement that talks about ensuring that outsourced processes are controlled or are being influenced. These are one of the areas that you'll be seeing terminology that talks about outsourced processes under clause 8 of the standard. And it's a terminology that is being used, outsourcing and the likes. But in the new standard, you might not, in fact, I tried, maybe someone else can check. I tried to check all through the new standard. I'm unable to see where the terminology, the term outsource is being used anywhere. So it has been changed to externally provided service, externally provided services, product and services. So to make it more elaborate, to make it more encompassing, to make it more inclusive, and it is much more detailed. That terminology, externally provided services, it's much more detailed than just saying outsource processes. So that inclusivity when it comes to externally provided services are one of those amendments that came in the new standard. Then the core requirement remain fundamentally unchanged. When it's talking about the core things that we talk about, environmental sustainability, there's nothing like this one is no more a requirement, this one is no more a requirement. No, the core requirements remain fundamentally unchanged. Yes, that is the truth. Climate change, biodiversity that we're talking about now in the new version is something that has actually been in place. If you look at the policy, if you look at the policy statement when it comes to the ISO standard, when you look at the 2015 version and you look at the policy, and you look at the policy, you see there clearly in the policy that one of those in the note part, it is mentioned that there should be protection of environment, protecting the environment, which includes sustainable resource use, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and protection of biodiversity and ecosystem. Now you can see that this has already been existing in the 2015 version. It's not something new that is just being put in place in the 2026 version. It is essentially part of those things that have been present in the 2015 version. So I want us to understand that you will see the same thing in 2026 version. Other specific requirements to protect the environment can include preservation and conservation of natural resources. Yes, this is new. Then sustainable resources use. Then climate change mitigation and adaptation, and protection of biodiversity and ecosystem. So fundamentally, there are requirements that are still similar. So there are some things that are fundamentally unchanged. It's just that we are going deeper into what we should put in place when it comes to environmental sustainability. The terminology is modernized and clarified, like I give example of outsourced processes. Another one is risks and opportunities are now being defined together. There's no separation in the definition. We still get there. So those are just some of the little differences that you come across and the standard. Then harmonized structured alignment improved. Want to harmonize it from high level structure. We're now harmonizing most of the requirements, most of the standards together for them to have. If you remember, in ISO 9001, planning of changes is a requirement is a separate clause in ISO 9001. In earlier version of ISO 14001 and 45001, planning of changes was not explicitly created, but you have management of change under operational plan and control. Even in the action to address an opportunity, that is clause 6, we talk about some changes that can occur in your process, but there was no clear explicit clause that talks about planning of changes. It is now that we have now had the same way we have clause 6.3 as plan of changes in ISO 9001. We now have the same clause 6.3 as plan of changes in ISO 14001, because we understand that there are some processes that changes can affect the environmental aspect of the organization. For example, an organization that is into, let's say, that produces 1,000 tons of, let's say, I'm giving an example, 1,000 tons of what example can I use? I'm trying to use any name, any product. 1,000 tons of Coca-Cola, like for example, or 1,000. I'm trying to use a. I'm not. Something is not coming to my head. Okay, 1,000 tons that produces 1,000 tons of beverages, for example. Now, this same organization, due to expansion, business is growing, they now want to expand their production capacity to, let's say, 2,000 tons per year or per day. Now, in that case, you can see that there's already a change. So, what before there was no explicit clear requirement that talks about looking at those changes to know how it affects environmental impact. But now you need to look at that change, that paradigm shift when it comes to our processes, when it comes to our production, when it comes to our equipment, when it comes to our energy use. You must deliberately now you must be deliberate about how it affects your environmental aspect and impact, and how it contributes to environmental sustainability. So there is a direct, deliberate effort now that you must look at planning of changes. How do you plan for various changes that can occur? And most of the changes will come from your context, from your internal and external issues that you must have identified in your clause 4, because your clause 4 explicitly talk about your internal and external issues that must now include climate change, biodiversity, and all of these things that we are talking about. So these are part of the things we are talking about. We are still at the stage of introduction. We have not gone deeper into the conversation. I'm still giving us an overview of what this training, what this class will be all about. The shift from outsourced to externally provided, I explained this already. What remained the same? The PDCA cycle is still the same. The PDCA, I will not want to go into the detail of the PDCA cycle, but when we say the PDCA cycle, we're talking about how the standard is being structured. How the standard is being structured. How this, thank you, Mr. Innocent. 1,000 tons of limestone minerals. Thank you for that. I was trying to crack my head because I was trying to be sensitive with products and not mentioning it, but I later mentioned the product, a brand name. So, like I was saying, they are transitioning. I was talking about the PDCA. The PDCA is just like how the standard has been created from clause 1 to clause 4, majorly from clause 4 to clause 10. That way we have the plan, do, check, act. How the standard has been structured. Just like if you look at our scriptures, whether you are a Muslim or a Christian, or you are an Hindu, you have your scriptures. You see that there is a way they write and they structure these holy books. Same thing applies to some novels that you buy or some knowledge-based book. You see that there's an approach to writing, to drafting, or let me use the word writing or composing that particular document or that particular book. So the idea that was used to structure the standard is what we call the PDCA. That is the plan, the do, the check, and the act. And this is where this is the mother, or this is the parent, can I call it the parent clause? Let me put it that way. The parent approach that now encompasses the clauses. So under the plan phase, we have 3 clauses. In some knowledge areas, they say they have 4 clauses. But I personally, Wale Adegoke, I'm of the opinion that because when you look at even the ISO standard, when you look at the ISO standard itself, at the beginning of the document, when you look at the PDCA model, you will see that in that particular cycle that they create, where they create the relationship between the PDCA and the framework in the ISO standard, you see that support and operation was brought together in the same cycle. I don't want to go into that part now, because many times people ask me, is clause 7 in plan or is it in do? But I don't want to go into that detail. I've done a video on that before on my YouTube channel. So where am I going to now? What I'm saying now is that the plan, using my own principle, the plan has 3 clauses, which is clause 4, clause 5, and clause 6, which is the plan phase. Then we have the do, which is the clause 7 and clause 8. Then we have the C, which is the check, which is the clause 9. Then we have the A, which is the act, which is the clause 10. So the clause 4, 5, and 6, clause 4 is talking about the context of the organization, understanding what your management system is. What are you actually doing in your organization? What is your company about? That is the origo facie. That is the origin. That is the beginning. Because if you do not understand the context of your management system of your organization, you'll not be able to know how do you structure or design or establish and implement your environmental management system. That is why the context, for example, if you are in the oil and gas, the way you manage your environmental management system will be different from if you are in construction, because your environmental aspects are different, your internal issues are different, your external issues are different, your interested parties are different, your scope will be different. So there is a need for you to actually understand the context of your organization. That's what clause 4 is all about. Then clause 5 is now the leadership. When you understand your context, it is the leadership that links your context to your planning. They are the one that takes that now interpret your context, that interpret your clause 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, and 4.4, that now interpret it to plan. That is why when you look at your clause 6, it always makes reference to clause 4. Then let me say always. Most times when you look at clause 6.1, clause 6.1.1 of the standard, you will see that they will make reference to internal and external issues, which is what we have identified in your clause 4. Your context, your internal issues, you now look at what are the risks, what are the environmental aspect and impact. So there is a flow in the system. That is a plan phase. So your plan phase has clause 4 as context, clause 5 as leadership. Where we're talking about the leadership and commitment. Then we talk about the policy. Policy is putting it into life. You know, the Bible says, sorry, I'm quoting the Bible, though I'm not a Christian anyway. They say, these people, they worship me with their mouth, but their heart is far away from me. Many organizations, they will say, hey, we do this, we have this, we are committed to this, we are committed to environmental sustainability, we are reducing our carbon emission, we are doing this. But their heart is far away from it. What they are doing in reality is different. That is where the policy now comes in as a representation of their heart. Write it, if possible. I'm not saying you should tell your MD to cut his finger and put his blood on the policy statement too. I didn't say that, but it's a kind of commitment to say that yes, this is strategically what we are committed to in our organization as an organization. Then we now put it as a policy, a reflection of their 5.1, which is what they need to be committed to. That, please, can you hear me loud? Am I clear, please? If I'm clear, please type yes in the chat room. Because someone just said that my voice is shaking. Once in a while, I try to look at the comment section. Yes, they say my voice is clear. Please do not distract. Thou shall not distract. It is your own network, please. So as I was saying, the clause 4 will be interpreted in clause 6, but the clause 5 is the leadership that tells us that these people, they need to be committed in writing. Then that's clause 5.3, clause 5.2. Then from there, clause 5.3 is now where you now say, okay, we are committed to all of this. So this is how we want to share the responsibility. We cannot do it alone. Your top management cannot do it alone. That's why clause 5.3 now talks about roles and responsibilities and accountabilities, authorities. People must be accountable. People must be responsible. They must know their roles, understand what they stand to gain, stand to benefit, and how they contribute to overall environmental sustainability. Then clause 6 now talk about planning. 6.1 now talk about action to address the risks and opportunities, where you are talking about the risk that you have identified in clause 4.1, the issues that becomes a risk in 4.1, action to address those risks. We will talk about that. There are some clear changes in those ones too. There's a new sub clause clause under clause 6, clause 6.1 we are going to talk about. Then clause 6.2 now talks about setting objectives. What are those objectives that you need to put in place? When you say that this is your action that you want to put in place, your objective is like a wheel that propels you to achieve continual improvement. Your target, oh, I target this. We target to reduce our emission to this. We target to reduce our paper use to this. We target to plant so and so amount of trees. That target is like a wheel that keeps reminding you that this is what you want to achieve, and you start moving towards it to achieve that particular goal. So it's like the wheel. Then 6.3, which is now new in the new ISO 14001 2026 now talk about planning of changes. How do you plan your changes? Then we now have clause 7 and clause 8. Clause 7 is the supporting system. The support system that I'm not supposed to give you an overview of this, but because some people have not taken an ISO class before, they've not taken any kind of ISO class, so I'm trying to make them feel among. I'm trying to carry them along. That's why I'm going through this background knowledge. Ideally, I'm not supposed to go through this background knowledge at all. So from clause 7 and clause 8, clause 7 is a supporting system that help us to implement 8, which is the operation, because there is no way, there is no way that you want to carry out your operation without what's it called, without the supporting system. Let's look at a simple example. You want to cook jollof. At home. You can't just say, okay, you are in your clause 6, you are plan it. Oh, this I'll cook the jollof. I'll put this, I'll put curry, I'll put thyme, I'll put this is the time that I'm going to add what's it called? I'm going to add margarine. This is the time that I'm going to add oil. This one I'll put pepper. This one I'll put this one I will add water. This one I will stir it. You have created a process. You have identified the various risks that you can meet at the end of the day. Oh, while I'm cooking it, I can go and mistakenly add extra maggi, or the gas can finish that I'm using to cook, or there might not be power supply, or you are identify all your risks, and you have put action in place to address those risks. Then in clause 8 you are implementing, but you can't implement without the supporting system. That is why the clause 7 is now the support system, which I call RCACD. I want you to write RCACD in the chat room. I want you to write RCACD in the chat room. Clause 7 has 5 subclauses, which is RCACD. Write RCACD in the chat room. If you are not writing, you are wrong. Write RCACD in the chat room. RCACD. What do I mean by RCACD? Mr. Ojo Samuel, this might not be the time to ask questions, please. If you have any comment, please put it in the chat room. RCACD. What do I mean by RCACD? R means resources. The organization must provide resources to achieve environmental management system. If I was talking about jollof, you don't want a situation whereby you want to cook Nigerian jollof and you end up cooking Ghana jollof. And this take me to the battle of jollof. Who can tell me who has eaten Nigerian jollof and Ghana jollof? Who can tell us the best? Which one is the best between Nigerian jollof and Ghana jollof? Put it in the comment section. Who might not be able to unmute this time around. Between Nigerian jollof and Ghana jollof, which one is the best? Someone is saying that Ghana jollof, Nigeria. Someone saying Nigerian jollof, Ghana, Nigeria, Ghana. It's like we're having a lot of Ghanaians in this class. Nigeria, Ghana. Okay, people are saying Ghana jollof. Very soon, by God's grace, I'll be going to Ghana this year for AfriSave 2026. If you are going to join us in AfriSave 2026. So I'm going to test their Ghana jollof to know. Someone said Senegal jollof. I better get out of here. So what am I saying? You don't want a situation whereby you are cooking Nigerian jollof and you end up cooking Ghana jollof. That is where some areas of, you can see that most of these clauses is not in isolation. That is where planning of changes comes in again. Changes can occur in the area of your resources that can affect your output. So you must plan for changes, both internal and external changes, regulatory changes, structural changes, technological changes that can occur in your process, internal changes that can occur. So 7.1 talks about resources. Then 7.2 now talks about competency. Your staff must be competent. That is the CE competence. Then 7.3 now talks about awareness. 7.4 now talks about communication, internal and external communication. And 7.5 now talks about documented information. I don't want to go into detail again. Then clause 8 now talks about emergency response and preparedness. Then we now have clause 9 that I talk. Okay, clause 8 is 2 clauses. 8.1 is operational planning and control. Planning for your operation, you call that implementation. The 8.2 now talks about when you are unable to actually control your processes, because we are human beings, we are not God. There can still be error. We are not automated beings. Even automatic machines do mistake. There can still be error. How do you plan for emergency? Emergency response and preparedness. They now have clause 9. Clause 9 has 3 subclauses. How you carry out the performance evaluation. The first one is the one that you do regularly. 9.1, which I call the MMAE, monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation, which is what you do on a regular basis. Your noise level, your air quality, your what again do you check? Your noise level, your air quality, the particulate in the air. Your tell me, put it in the comment section. Those that are called environmentalists, what do you check when it comes to environmental aspect? Or when it comes to environmental monitoring, tell us what you check. Let us put it in the comment section. Your effluent, thank you. NH3, ammonia, thank you. Vibration, air, sound, air quality, noise levels, your OWR for when you are deciding your effluent, particulate matter, water quality. Thank you so much. These are the things. Yes, VOC, thank you. Noise levels. Oh, I'm too fast. Ah, okay, I will slow down a bit because this is still the foundation. We've not even got into the class. I'm still giving foundational explanation. So sorry about that. That's why we have it on YouTube. You can always watch it later. I will calm down a bit by the time we get to the core of the class. So sorry about that. So air levels, water quality, all of these things are what you check. So in your performance evaluation under clause 9.1, we are looking at your regular monitoring, your measurement, what you do on a daily basis to ensure that you stay in line with your objective that you are set. You stay in line with your target. You stay in line with your operational plan and control. You need to measure your performance. Then we now have 9.2, which is the less regular ones. Some companies carry out internal audit on a monthly basis, some quarterly, some twice in a year, some once in a year, which is a minimum because our complexity differs. There is nowhere in the standard says that it must be twice in a year. It's based on the complexity of your processes. So we now have clause 9.2 that now talks about the internal audit that you do in your organization. Then in 9.3, we now talk about management review, which is what the management will now come together. They will look at the output from your internal audit. They will look at what you have been monitoring. They will look at your set objective. They will look at your target. They will look at your context. They will look at your policies. Then they will now start coming up with new opportunities for improvement. Then they come together, they discuss. Then in clause 10, we now have continuous improvement from your non-conformities. How do you address non-conformities? How do you improve in your processes? So that is what we are talking about. So that is about an overview. Thank you. Soil strength. That is an overview, a general view of what the PDCA means. I'm only explaining that one statement. PDCA cycle and continual improvement core. These ones, they are still there. There are no changes. It remains the same. Content of the organization remains the same. Risk-based thinking remains the same. And integration with the standard is still very easy. And that is why we are here to. So what should you note? If your environmental management system is mature, if you have a good and mature system in your organization and it is well run, you are most likely already doing what you are doing, what like 90%. You just need to now focus on, okay, in our risk register, in our environmental aspect, did we consider environmental aspect? Were we deliberate about biodiversity? Did we include all those things? So you're now more deliberate into looking at what are those new things that the standard has deliberately now emphasized on. Then you can see what I'm saying here. You now focus more, you now focus deliberately. If you didn't focus on climate change before, you now must now include climate change in your context. When you look at, for example, when you look at clause 4.1, in the earlier version of the standard, it is in clause 4.1, it was not written there. What you just see there is that the organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that can affect the intended outcome of its environmental management system. Such issues shall include environmental conditions being affected by or capable of being affected by the organization, affecting the organization. Now, but when you look at in the new standard, they now put it there that the organization shall determine the external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that can affect its ability to achieve the intended outcome of its environmental management system. These issues shall include, you can see now in the new standard, they deliberately emphasize on it. They deliberately put it into reality. They brought it out live that these issues shall include environmental conditions being affected by the organization or capable of affecting the organization, such as pollution levels, availability of natural resources, climate change, biodiversity, or ecosystem health. Now, what does this tell us? Now, the new standard is now more bidirectional. What do I mean by bidirectional? I'll still explain more in the class. What I mean by bidirectional is that it is now a two-way thing. Before, it has always been a two-way thing, but it is not well pronounced. But look at the context here. It's telling us that these issues shall include environmental conditions being affected by the organization, or capable of affecting the organization. That is a two-way direction. How do we affect the environment? And how is the environment affecting us? How is it affecting our progress? How is it affecting our process? And they now deliberately mentioned them. They said it should include such as pollution levels, availability of natural resources, climate change, biodiversity, or ecosystem health. And there's more emphasis and explanation under Annex 4.1, where the explanation. You see, many of us, when we are going through the ISO standard, we only focus on the clauses from clause 4 to clause 10, but we forget that there is a place that we call the annex part, guidance of the use of this document, the annex A, that guides you more. You don't only focus on the ISO clause. You look at that annex part. Many of us don't do that. We only focus on the clause. And that annex part is what explains what the standard means for us. More explanation. So if you go to the annex A under clause 4 point under clause A 4.1, A.4.1, you see more explanation about the environmental conditions relating to water change, water quality, air quality, climate, land use, contamination, natural resources, ecosystem health, biodiversity, and so many other things that is being discussed. So next time we are going through the standard, don't only focus on the major clauses, clause 4 to 10. Go to the annex that guides you on the document and learn more about the standard. I hope you have learned something today. Now, the 2024 Climate Change Amendment is now formally integrated into this new version. Now we are going straight into the class now. This is just the beginning. Now, let's look at what are the structure. I've done an overview of clause 4 to clause 10 for us. Now, when you look at the 2015 version, under clause 6.1, clause 6.1 is where we have, I said this planning phase, that is the planning clause, that is clause 6, as initially has two subclauses, that is 6.1, that talks about the action to address the risks and opportunities, and clause 6.2 that talks about objectives. Now, in that 6.1, there are a lot of subclauses. Because we are talking about action to address risks and opportunities, then you are focusing on issue of environmental aspects, because those are the areas to look out for. Those are the environmental aspects, environmental impact, compliance obligations, then risk and opportunities. In the earlier version of this standard, when you look at it carefully, you will see that it only had 4 subclauses. That is 6.1.4, sorry, 6.1.1, 6.1.2, 6.1.3, and 6.1.4. The requirement there are still the same. It is just a kind of rearrangement. The requirement that I did the same. The only difference now in this clause 6.1 is that there is a new clause introduced, which is the 6.1.5. 6 is now extended to 5 subclauses instead of 4. Before it was 6.1.1, 6.1.2, 6.1.3, and 6.1.4. But now in the new standard, we now have it to what? 6.1.5. What is the difference? Why is it now 6.1.5? Why do you now have 5 subclauses under this particular action to address an opportunity? It is very simple and straightforward. There is a new introduction of risk and opportunity. You will now start asking me, is the risk and opportunity, is it a new thing that is just coming up? The content of that 6.1.4, is it something that is new? What have they added to it? What is that new thing that they are added to it? Oh, they are going to disturb us, they are going to stress us. What is the new thing? My dear, there is no new thing. There is no new thing that is there. They only, like we said, there's a whole lot of restructuring. Please, if you can hear me loud and clear, please type yes in the chat room. Somebody is complaining about my voice again. If you can hear me loud and clear, please type yes in the chat room. Please, if you are having issue with voice, please always go back to your own system. Yes, people can hear me loud and clear. People can hear me loud and clear, please. Now, like I was saying, there is nothing new there. What they did was that they restructured it. If you look at 6.1 in the earlier version, when you look at clause 6.1.1, let me read what is there. I hope you've opened your standard. When you look at what is in clause 6.1.1, that statement that is in clause 6.1.1 is what was brought to clause 6.1.4. When planning for the environmental management system, the organization shall consider from that part till when they said achieve continuous improvement in the earlier version, what they did, the only thing that they did there was to create a separate clause, and that's what we call restructuring, which is the risk and opportunity, and they now fixed it under 6.1.4. The content is still the same. If you look at clause 6.1.1 in the new version, you now have it as the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain processes needed to meet requirements in clause 6.1.2 to 6.1.5. In the other version, it was to 6.1.4. The processes must be available as documented information. You will see there that the same thing is what you are seeing in clause 6.1.4. All of this shows you that it is what? It is still the same requirement. They only restructured it and extended it. They only restructured it. So don't panic. Don't panic. Like I said, we will still go to do those ones that they have core changes, new core changes. But I'm telling you for free that most of these things, like what we just analyzed now, is just what is being put there. They just restructured it. Before, what you have now in the new version as 6.1.4, 6.1.4 was what we had in 6.1.1. So what you just need to do as a process owner is that if you have your documented processes, you will now realign it when you are talking about implementing the requirement of the earlier version, which was in 6.1.1, that talks about, sorry my that that talks about, I'm trying to look at open the earlier version. I'm trying to open the earlier version that talks about when planning for the environmental management system, the organization shall consider the internal and external issues, the requirement and the scope, and determine the risks and opportunities for that relates to the environmental aspects and compliance obligations and other issues and requirements. What they are saying here is very simple. Your clause 4, you've identified some internal and external issues. You've identified, for example, use of high energy consuming equipment as an environment, as an issue. Now, because you have identified use of high energy consuming equipment as an issue, then when you are now talking about your action to address your risk in clause 6.1, you are now looking at what are the risks involved, what are the environmental aspects for this part, what is actually the risk involved in using of this high consuming energy. So automatically in clause 6.1.1, which is now in 6.1.4. So for example, if you have your if you created the structure of your document, for example, to be exactly like the ISO standard, what it means is that you now need to replace it and restructure it and put that particular implementation or that particular requirement under clause 6.1.4, because before it was under clause 6.1.1. Maybe for example, your environmental register, your risk register, for example, that have identified many of these risks, If you are using the structure of the standard, you now need to position it under clause 6.1.4. That is just the difference. The requirements are still the same. Then because they fixed 6.1.4 to be risks and opportunities, which you have spoken about now, they now brought down planning action into 6.1.5, which was initially in 6.1.4. If you understand this, please type yes in the chat room. If you understand this, please type yes in the chat room. All right, thank you. Then we now have clause 6.1, clause 6.3, which is a separate clause of the standard, which is a separate clause of the standard, which is they created that one separately. And what is talking about in this particular requirement, in this particular standard, is to ensure that the organization determines what are the need for changes that can affect or can affect the environmental management system. The changes shall be carried out in a planned manner. When you are implementing when you are establishing such changes, for those that have done change management, these changes must be done in a planned manner. The changes shall be managed to ensure that the organization shall achieve the intended outcome of the management system. What we are saying here is very simple. Any changes that occur in your process, maybe your production capacity, or you are using a new equipment or a new regulation, or there's a new technology, whatever you are doing in your changes, it must not affect your intended outcome, what you want to achieve for your environmental management system. Because you have set targets, you have set measurable targets, you have set your objective, you have put controls in place. All these things must not be affected by any changes that can occur. Because from your internal and external issues, there can be changes. Changes can occur. And you can see many aspects where these changes need to be addressed. So when you look at your standard, you understand that there is a need for you to look at the changes. And that is one of the new requirements from the ISO standard. That's one of the new requirements. Because for example, now you want to start producing something new. Maybe you are producing a particular, look at iPhone, for example. They change their charging port. It's a change. There can be changes in volume, there can be changes in capacity, there can be changes in what you are producing, there can be changes, because you need to understand that when you are planning and controlling any temporary or permanent changes, you must understand that it can impact environmental performance. Something can happen, something can deviate because you have changed something many times. let's look at let's look at accident that has happened in the world, in the earlier world. If you look at accident like the Flexoboro disaster, okay, that was even more of safety. When you look at the Bhopal disaster, for example, the Bhopal disaster had element of change. Many things changed in their process that led to that environmental pollution that killed many people. Oil spillage accidents that happened in the past are a result of changes that were not addressed. Maybe they brought a new equipment and they didn't know how the equipment will integrate into the existing equipment, then that lead to spillage. Changes can occur in any way. So in your processes that you have structured, you must understand that changes can occur and ensure that such changes is properly planned so as not to affect your intended outcome. Changes of your product, of your services, your processes, your operations, your equipment, your facilities. There can be changes in compliance obligation. A new rule can come up. NIMASA, NMDPRA, NESRA, they can come up with new rules, new regulation, even in aviation, because you also deal with, you see, environmental aspect and impact deals with every sector. Even in aviation, maybe because that one is more of the impact of the environment on their operation of taking flight and the likes. There can be change in weather. What do you do? Those are temporal changes. They can also be your permanent or long-term changes. You are talking about the fuel that is being used. How does it affect the environment? What new technology, what new kind of aircraft is being deployed now that emits less emission? There can be changes in knowledge or information about environmental aspects. New studies might have been done about what you use. There can be new studies. and you must follow it through. There was a time in a particular country where the what is it called? How will I put it? The oil, the lubricant that is being used to for transformers, because there was a new change in lubrication. They saw it as highly, that it was hazardous, that this particular oil we use for our transformers are highly hazardous and have high environmental impact. Then there was a new regulation to change them to new ones that has less environmental impact. And at the point of discharging, they didn't consider the life cycle thinking. At the point of discharging them, they discharge them to the environment, to people, and people were using, and you imagine that they were using those things to cook for all these roadside meals, like all these people that fry things by the roadside. It happened. Why? Number one, when they came about those changes, they did not understand the full impact. Thank you, PCBs. Thank you very much, sir. PCBs, they didn't understand the full impact. And at the end of the day, they did not understand the life cycle perspective of how to properly dispose them. And this led to a lot of health issues in that particular society. There can be change in knowledge, information about environmental impact. There can be development in knowledge and technology. There can be change in technical specifications of materials or process input. There can be change in business assets. There can be change in ventures. There can be new leadership. Any change can occur. No matter what the change is, how does it affect your process? How does it affect the environment? How does it affect your organization? How does it affect the mother earth as a whole? Then when you look at clause 9.3, that one is 9.3. Who can tell me what clause 9.3 is? I know I have many of my students here, many of my past delegates. Who can tell me what clause 9.3 is? Clause 9.3. Who can tell us what clause 9.3 is? If you are on YouTube, please also respond to what we are discussing. It also applies to you. If you're on YouTube, your comment, your comment will help us to understand that you are with us. Management review. Thank you. Management review. Management review. Thank you very much. So we look at the earlier version, which I'm deliberately doing this overview because by the time we get to those places, we will know that yes, we have talked about it already. When you look at the earlier version, it was not structured. It was just a whole long of requirements. When you look at the earlier version, it was just 9.3. There was no structure to it. There was no structure to it. It was just 9.3. But in the new version, which is 2026 version, you will see there that they now structured it into 9.1, 9.2, and 9.3. The requirements are still the same. So like I said, many of these things don't need to stress yourself. Just understand what are those structural changes, what are those new changes, and implement accordingly. Then clause 10 add a new kind of daisy change. It's not really, it's also structural change. They brought, in the earlier version, we had three subclauses: 10.1, 10.2, and 10.3. Then what did they do? Let me go back to the 9.3. 9.3 now has 9.3.1, 9.3.2, 9.3.3. Structurally, they just restructure it properly to include input, output, what's it called? General statement, the management review input, and the management review output, which is the result. In the earlier version, all these were there before, but it was not structured. Now, in clause 10, they just brought what is it called? 10.3. They brought it to 10.1. It's still the same thing that is in 10.1 that is there, but they just renamed that 10.1 as what? As continual improvement. And we now have 10.2 still remain as non-conformity and corrective action. Then there was no need for 10.3 again. That's just a change. Structural changes. Clause structural changes. So you must understand these structural changes. So you need to update all your cross-reference procedures. all your procedures, when many of us, if we develop SOPs and the likes, we reference it to the standard. We say, okay, this one is based on clause 9.1, clause 6.3, clause 6.1.4. So you just need to now reference it properly to those structural changes that you have in the new standard. And management review template, training checklist, audit checklist, training material that you have, you just need to rearrange them and make them in line with the standard. For example, the 6.1.1 to 6.1.5 structural shifts affect every planning document. So you need to just ensure that you just restructure it and make it just in line with what we have. The requirements are still what we had. Many of them are still what we had in the earlier version. Like I said, don't panic. It is still almost the same. Now, what about terms and definitions? Like I said, we even go to terms and definition. If you look at the earlier version, what they defined in the definition under clause 3, and you can confirm what was defined in the earlier version was just definition of environmental policy. Environmental policy was defined in the earlier version. When you look at clause 3, environmental policy was defined in the earlier version. But in the new version, there's a definition for environmental policy and definition for policy itself. I can ask you in the exam, in the assessment. There's a definition for policy and definition for environmental policy. Those are just the changes. Policy was defined separately. Now also risk was defined separately. In the earlier version, it was just risk and opportunities that was defined together. But in the new version, we have risk being defined separately. Can we see? Those are the structural definitions. Then also definition of process. Process 2 was defined in the new standard. You can confirm here yourself. Process 2 was defined in the new standard. In the earlier version, there was no definition for process. There, sorry. What I'm saying is that the definition for process was also added in the 2025 version, because in the 2015 version there was also definition for process. Few seconds, please. I'm trying to confirm something. This thing has changed. 2015. In the earlier version, we had definition for process also in the earlier version. I'm seeing that now. It was the last definition under 3.3.5. The definition for process was there. The definition for process was there, but in the new version, we do not have a definition for process. These are just minor changes anyway, but like I said, we want to look at every single thing that changed. Every single thing that changed when it comes to the ISO standard, what was added and what was removed. Then we have outsource. I explained this at the beginning of the class. Outsource was removed. Outsource was removed. Outsource was removed. We now have externally provided services. Then use of in this document. Then we have in this document is being used as a standardized terminology now. In the earlier version, we say must be available as documented information. That is the only thing that we had. But now we now use, when it comes to definition, when it comes to documented information, there is a reference to in this document, making reference to the ISO standard itself. The meeting compliance obligation wording was also added to it. Then for the ISO 14001, like now, like I said, there was no definition of policy. Definition of outsource was not there. Then use definition of outsource Definition of outsource was existed then in the earlier version, but in the new version, there's no definition of outsource again. Then use in this international standard. In the earlier version, what we have there was use of in this international standard. But now, in the newest version, what we have now is in this document. It was changed for there are some areas where they talk about in this international standard, in this international standard, in this international standard. But now that terminology has changed to in this document. For example, when you look at under clause 4.4, when you're talking about the environmental management system itself, it's very clear and straightforward there. What do we have there? They said to achieve the intended outcome including enhancing its environmental performance, the organization shall establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve an environmental management system, including the processes needed and their interaction in accordance with the requirement of this international standard. You can see of this international standard. If you look at the new version, we now have the same statement that says to achieve the intended outcome, including enhancing its environmental performance, the organization shall establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve an environmental management system, including the processes needed and their interaction in accordance with the requirement of this document. There is a change because they understand that organizations use the ISO standard as a benchmark to develop their own document, their own, for example, their manual. So many of the organizations they use in international standard, but using in this document makes it much more standardized. Then in another little change is that in the earlier version we have fulfill compliance obligation, but in the new version we now have it as meet compliance obligation. So these are just terminologies that have changed. Now, for example, key documented information. All key processes must now be available as documented information, which is a standardized across all other documents. For example, in the ISO 14001, is that ISO 5001 and 9001, another management system standard. Available as documented information is the right terminology across, so it will make it easier for us to properly integrate. So what they are trying to do is to ensure that across all the management, all the ISO documents, all the standards, management system standard that we have, the terminologies are the same. So that is part of what is being done. Then our source was also changed to externally provided services, externally provided product and services instead of outsourced processes. Now there's a shift from narrow outsourced processes. Now outsourced processes is more of narrow, it's not detailed. It's external provided products and services has a wider coverage. Are we together in this class? There's a wider coverage. Are we together? If you are together, please type yes in the chat room. If you are together, type yes in the chat room. So, like I was saying, there have been a lot of confusion. Now, people confused before because every every outsourced process is externally provided, but it's not every externally provided services that is actually being outsourced. Now, when we're talking about externally provided products and services, it is a broader term that is used in the ISO standard because it includes products, it includes services, it includes processes, and it is much more broad because companies rely more of external parties. They rely more of external practice, while outsource is a specific type of externally provided services. It's just a specific. What it means is that a process that an organization needs for its management system or for their operation, but choose to have to have performed that particular task or that particular process by an external party instead of them doing it internally. So the idea here is that the process remain part of your organization's system, but it's being done by another company. So most times there is a need for that shift to make everything to be what's it called, to be externally provided services, because it is not properly communicated. When companies say outsource, even during auditing, sometimes it can be confusing. They will start arguing with the auditors. It's an outsource process, it's not part of what we do, we have outsourced it, we have outsourced it. That terminology, that term is always a ringing bell when you are auditing procurement department. They be telling you it's an outsource process, it's outsourced, we have outsourced it, it's not part of what we do. No, that is why the ISO standard came up with a better terminology that is called externally provided service. So it's still your core duty to be able to influence and control it. So because when they say outsource, it made it look like they don't have anything to do with it. Let's say, for example, let's look at a general example. Now, let's use let's say, for example, Coca-Cola. Now let's say they get sugar from and let's say they get sugar from Dangote or Boa Cement, I don't know, Boa Sugar, whatever. Now let's say they get sugar from there. Now when the sugar is coming in, are they not supposed to control what comes in? Should they say because they have because they have already outsourced it, and then whatever comes in they should not manage it? So it causes a lot of confusion when companies outsource some processes. They believe that they don't have control over it. For example, when they have a waste management company that comes to carry their waste, they will tell you that we have outsourced it, then we don't have anything to do with it. No, the new ISO standard is now telling them that you must be able to monitor and control it. Where are they taking your waste to? Are you sure that they are taking your waste to a registered dump site by the government? So that is why the term externally provided still look inclusive. That even though we have said somebody to do it for us, it's just externally provided. It's still part of what we do. Unlike outsource, that sounds more like they've already taken it out. So like somebody like an engineer said here, outsource may introduce risk without intention. So the standard want them to understand that when you take activities, processes, product out for some companies to do it for you, it's still part of your process. So that is why there's a change in that terminology from using outsourced processes to making it now externally provided services and products. Then this extend EMS control to suppliers, contractors, procurement, and not just the traditional owner, the and not just what engineer said there got me distracted. Thank you, Dr. Lucky. And not just traditional outsourcing. It makes us to take ownership. Yes, that's what I'm trying to look for. It makes us to, when they use the word externally provided, there is that ownership that comes with it. So you need to update all your EMS, all the environmental documentations, contractor agreement document, to change the terminology from maybe your vendor registration form that you use outsource contractor. You now need to change that terminology to externally provided services and products. Anyway, you have the term outsource, you change that terminology. That's what the ISO standard has introduced. Those are part of the changes. Now, in context, in clause 4, there is a focus, more expansion on the scope, which I've already spoken about in clause 4 when we're talking about pollution level, biodiversity, and the likes, and life cycle thinking. Now, environmental management system consideration in scope, there is now deliberate effort that you must look at your pollution levels. It is not something that every organization must do. It was not explicitly mentioned in the context in clause 4.1 before, but now in the new standard it is now there. Climate change impact. Thank you. You are accountable. God bless you. Please, those in the comment section, ensure that you are engaging in the conversation so that we would know that you are also with us. Sorry, those in the YouTube channel. Pollution levels, availability of natural resources, climate change impact, how the natural resources that you use for your, let's say companies that use natural resources, you use water, is natural resource. Maybe in the oil and gas, you use crude oil. In the mining, you use limestone, you use whatever activities that involve oil. There is always a natural resource that you use, so you must include them in your scope. Climate change impact, biodiversity, ecosystem, and life cycle thinking. You must think about life. No, life cycle is something that we have talking about even in the earlier version, but it's just that it is much more pronounced in the new version. That is why in the new standard, thank you. That is why in the new standard, there is a stronger consideration of life cycle and value chain. You must understand your value chain when it comes to your environmental management system scope, the environmental aspect. Because if you look at your clause 6.1.2, there's a focus on environmental aspect, which is also in the earlier version. You must for your environmental aspect, you must look at all your activities, all your product, all your services, and what are the life cycle stages that you have, from procurement, from raw material acquisition, down to use and proper disposal of your product and services, or whatever that you relate with. Your, even internally, the equipment that you use, how do you, it's not only how, so most times companies think that we are only focusing on, okay, their product, how is it being used, how do they dispose it of. Even the equipment that you use to produce them, what is the life cycle thinking that you have with it? The equipment, what is the life cycle? The chemicals that you use in your production product, whether directly or indirectly, what is the life cycle the life cycle thinking? Your supplier control, your contractor requirement, sustainability, sustainable procurement. The procurement department, do they include sustainability in their procurement? Recycling instructions on the packaging material and how you control your packaging. So these are various examples. You look at, for example, if you're in the mining industry now, let's say cement production, from the limestone extraction to the raw material transportation, because when they extract limestone, it's either they use conveyor belt, in fact, they use conveyor belt at some point, and they also use heavy duty trucks to actually transport them from the quarry site, from the blasting site, to the crusher, to the primary crusher. So these are the stages: raw material transport, the manufacturing, the packaging of the cement, the production, the product use, how do they use the cement, and the proper disposal of this of the cement packaging material. Then, for example, in the limestone extraction, we talk about the land degradation, the dust that comes from it. For the raw material transportation, we talk about the fuel emission. For the manufacturing, we talk about air quality, air emission, energy use. These are environmental considerations. So what the standard is saying is that for every of your stages, you must ensure that you are considering the life cycle perspective. And there's stronger emphasis on environmental conditions, both internal and external, which is also in the earlier version. Which is also in the earlier version. External influences on the organization, life cycle thinking across all your operations, like I've said. Life cycle thinking across all your operation. You must have a structured environmental thinking across the value chain and the life cycle. How does, from the beginning of your production process till the end, everything that you make use of, what is the life cycle thinking? Everything that you produce, what is the life cycle thinking? Influence and control over the life cycle must be there, and relevant interested parties now have interest in all new environmental considerations. So then, if you look at the practical guidance for implementation, what do you need to do? Number one, your environmental aspect register. Many of us, we have that register. If you look at your environmental aspect register, you need to review it and update them to include climate change and biodiversity, pollution levels, ecosystem. You must review them. Go and take your document and review them to include these things. And thank God we are in the era of artificial intelligence, where you can use many tools to make these things easy for you. Then you need to map your interested parties and their specific interests in each new environmental factor. Now in the clause 4.2 that talks about interested parties, they are now telling you that in your interested parties, oh, you must know if their interests also include biodiversity. If you look at the note under 4.2, it says relevant interested parties can have needs and expectations relating to environmental conditions such as pollution levels, availability of natural resources, climate change, biodiversity, or ecosystem health. The relevant needs and expectations of interested parties other than legal requirement becomes a compliance obligation when the organization decides to comply with them. I don't want to go into difference between compliance obligation and legal requirement. But when you say compliance obligation, it has to do with beyond just legal requirement. Whatever you choose to comply with becomes your compliance obligation. The legal requirement has to do with legal, something that is purely legal, laws, regulations, and the likes. But that's not where we are going. What we are saying here is that in your interested party, in the new standard, you must look at what are their are they interested in climate. In fact, you must put it as part of their interest, because it's better to be safe than sorry. Integrate life cycle stages into environmental impact assessment. Your EIA, you must integrate life cycle thinking, life cycle stages from the design, from the raw material procurement, from beginning to the end of your products and services. Then you must document how normal and abnormal operation condition affect environmental conditions. Now these are also part of the part of what we now see. Even though I believe, where is it, I think in the earlier version, I think I've come across that statement before. Abnormal condition, if you look at clause 6.1.2 under environmental aspects, even in the earlier version, when we say within the scope of the environmental management system, remember that your clause 6.1 is talking about action to address risks and opportunities. Now under your environmental aspect, which you must look out for, what are the environmental aspects? It says that within the defined scope of the environmental management system, the organization shall determine the environmental aspect of its activities, of its products, of its services that it can control and those that it can influence, and their environmental impact considering a life cycle perspective. When determining the environmental aspect, the organization shall take into account the changes. Then number two, abnormal conditions and reasonably foreseeable emergency situation. What are the abnormal conditions that has deviated from the normal operation? I made reference to Bhopal disaster that happened in India, in Bhopal in India. There were abnormal conditions, abnormal situations that should have been addressed, but they were managing it. The gauge that was supposed to monitor, the pressure level of where they have the MIC, that is a methyl isocyanate, that led to this whole disaster, was not working properly. So they did not look at those abnormal conditions. That's why the new standard is saying that you must look at how normal and abnormal operation condition can affect environmental performance based on your processes, based on what you do. These are what we now have been emphasized on. Your policy. When you look at your policy under clause 5.2, even though in the earlier version it was written there under notes that other specific commitment to protect the environment can include sustainable and resource use, climate change, and the likes. In the new version that we are talking about, the 2026 version that we are talking about, under the same clause 5.2, the same is being used, is being stated. However, there is inclusion of preservation or conservation of natural resources. This one also just says sustainable resource use, which is where it started from. But this new version now focuses on preservation and conservation of natural resources before we now start having what we had in earlier version, which is sustainable resource use, climate change mitigation and adaptation, or protection of biodiversity and ecosystem. What am I going to? In the policy statement, part of what must be included, what you should also consider Commitment to protect the environment can also include preserving and conserving of natural resources. If you deal with natural resources, there's no company that say that they don't use water. It might not be their major production need for production, but most times even for major productions, water is being used. Even if you are in the banking sector that you don't use water, but your staff make use of water, they use water in the bathroom, they make use of water in some of their things that they do. So water becomes something that you use. So it's a general use. Natural resources is something that is not is that is used by everyone. So you should include it. Conserving natural resources, sustainable resource use, climate change mitigation and adaptation, the protection of biodiversity and ecosystem, which is what you should also consider if it applies to you when you are developing your policy. So for auditors, what it means is that if you're an auditor, part of what you add in your audit checklist is to ask, does the policy mention climate change? Do they have climate change in their policy? And if it does, how does it actually relate to? Because as auditor, you don't just ask close-ended questions. This is not an auditor class. I'm just saying, you don't just ask close-ended. Your question must be both close-ended, open-ended, seek clarification. If their policy includes climate change, ask them which aspect of their operations actually involves climate change. Then you now start looking at their risk and opportunities and environmental aspects. Then you audit further. But you can start from understanding if they don't now have climate change included, then you now ask them why. Then you explain why it's now a new requirement. Remember, the transition period is 3 years. So you don't start raising up conformity at the beginning. Take it, becomes an observation. Then from an observation, it can now be gradually when the transition period ends and they still don't include climate change, then it now become an issue. Then is biodiversity explicitly addressed? Then our natural resources conservation commitment stated? Is sustainable resource use defined? Have they defined their sustainable resource use? Do they have processes where they can use more sustainable resources rather than the one that they are using earlier that is not sustainable? Do they have part of, for example, part of their operations or their processes that is connected to a renewable source of energy? Is the policy available as documented information, which is part of what the earlier version also talk about? Now, leadership responsibility. What do we expect from the leaders? What are the leadership responsibility? Ensure policy include all new commitment area that I have mentioned. It should be there. Then demonstrate active promotion of sustainability. Sustainability is now the order of the day. They must be deliberate about building a sustainable business when it comes to environmental sustainability. Then integrate climate and biodiversity into strategic decisions that they make. They should look at how are their products, how are their processes, their equipment, the chemicals, the raw material that they use, how does it lead to or integrate to climate change and biodiversity. They communicate policy internally and externally within the organization, which is the earlier requirement too. It's not a new thing. Then review policy adequacy during management review. This also is in the earlier version too. Then risks and opportunities. Like I've said earlier, we said clause 6.1 now has 5 subclauses. In the earlier version, it was four subclauses. Now 6.1.4, that is risk and opportunity, which is a new subclause, was actually the same content, or is actually the same content that was in 6.1.1. Just a kind of rearrangement to actually focus more on this is about risk and opportunities. Because when you're talking about identifying issues, identifying in clause 6.1, in clause 4.1, which is your internal and external issue, then identifying the interested party, considering your internal and external issues, considering your interested parties, then your scope to develop your EMS. Now, this clause 4.1.4 now says, sorry, clause 6.1.4 now says that when you are determining your action to address your risk, when you are talking about your environmental aspect, you must consider these things in clause 4.1, which was also in the earlier version, just a repositioning. So now it's now clearly separate from risk identification. Action must address risk and opportunities. Now it is now a separate clause that talks about risk and opportunities as a new requirement, which is, like I said, it was already in clause 6.1.1, just a restructuring. So if you have not implemented this before, it's now telling you that it's now putting it into your eyes directly like this, that you must consider this as an organization. Look at the environmental risk that you have from your processes and must integrate it to your processes and evaluated for effectiveness. Then also, we now have it as a separate clause, like I said. The main statement from it was removed from 6.1.1, like I said. The main statement from the 6.1.1 was moved to this 6.1.4. So there's no difference, just a restructuring. The clearer distinction from planning action. The process must be available as documented information. This was also in the earlier version too. Please confirm that you can see hear me loud and clear. Yes, thank you. All right, let's move on. Now, what are the additional updates? The long statement was now brought, like I said, was now brought from 6.1.1 to 6.1.4. So only new requirement there is the addition of, not really a new requirement, but the structuring is from the 6.1.2 to 6.1.5, which I've already explained to us earlier in this class. Then environmental aspects now explicitly include life cycle perspective from raw material, design, product, transportation, use, end of life use, and disposal, which I've already explained also. Then, like I said, we now have a separate clause, which is the mainly new thing that is here. The main new thing that is here is 6.3, which I've already explained also. When the organization determines the need for changes that affect or can affect the EMS, changes shall be carried out in a planned manner. They must carry out their changes in a planned manner. Every change that wants to occur must be planned, and I've already explained this in this class already, and managed to ensure that you achieve your intended outcome of your environmental management system. This is a separate clause. Now, what are those changes? Based on clause 6.3, under the guidance for use, operational changes, new products, new services, infrastructure, facility, supplier switches, restructuring, regulations, new location, new facility, anything can change. New capacity. I already explained this already. So that is why there is a clearer understanding of these changes. Then you should understand these changes, the prayers for changes. This is generally under clause. We already know this under clause 8, under management of change, especially in the ISO 5001. So there is a MOC, the one we call management of change, which is what we have, is a common knowledge that many of us have. There are courses on it, on MOC, but it's simply simple. What we are saying here is that before you implement any change, understand the impact of that change. You want to bring in a new equipment. You want to expand your building. You want to expand your building. You want to increase staff strength. When you increase staff, maybe we want to double yours. Maybe you have 100 staff before, now you want to have 200 staff. It means that you should be having 200. If you used to generate 100 tons of waste before, you should be expecting to start having 200 tons of waste. If before you used to produce 1,000 tons of like somebody gave an example of a particular chemical, now you want to double it. Definitely you consume more energy. Before you are a delivery company and you used to deliver within Lagos, and now you want to deliver to outside Lagos, start delivering to Abuja, start delivering to, so you know that that's expansion. How does that change that you are integrating into your business? How does it affect the process? So you must evaluate the environmental impact of that change before implementing it. Then determine if changes affect the EMS, and if it does, what do you want to do to address it? Monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of those changes and ensure that the changes are communicated to interested parties. You must communicate it. Like I used to say, I used to say that communication is like the nerves. It's like the nerves. It's like the neurons that connect every part of the body. When you apply a particular change and you don't communicate it, there will be a problem. You want to introduce any changes, you must communicate to relevant parties for them to know that, yes, this and this has changed in our processes. Then review result of changes post-implementation. After implementing, what is the result of these changes? Review result of changes post-implementation and maintain evidence as documented information. Evidence of this review, evidence of these changes must be documented in your processes. Now, what are the practical steps? You need to create a simple change request form for that you want to use to capture it. Now, we want to talk about change now because this is a new requirement in EMS. So now what we are saying, number one, is that you need to create, for example, a simple change request form that will capture describing the changes, environmental impact of the changes, approval of the changes, then implementation date to implement the changes. Whatever you want to change, does it affect the environment? Does it affect your processes? Then define what are those triggers that can require us to request for a change request form. Maybe they want to install a new equipment. They want to carry out process modification. They want to expand and create a new line. Supplier changes. Want to change a supplier. Want to expand the facility. Changes can occur across board in different areas. Then link to existing management of change procedure if you have this already, because like we said, in the earlier standard, we have planning of changes in clause 9, in ISO 9001, clause 6.3, same clause, same number for ISO 9001. So if you already have a system for MOC already, you don't need to start developing a different process. Just integrate what you have already in your organization and now integrate it into the environmental management system. As simple as that. The evidence can include your change forms, minute of meeting of your change, digital workflow log. Then formal procedures might not be required. Once you already have a procedure for management of change already in your organization based on other standards, you just need to integrate it into environmental management system. Then for operational planning and control under clause 8, under do, I've already said this, there's a shift from outsourced processes to externally provided products and services. This closes the argument of whether a supplier relationship qualifies as outsourced or procurement. If an external provider supplies a product, a process, a service, or product relevant to the EMS, you need controls. That is why there is a change, there's a shift from using the term outsourced to what? Externally provided services. Sometimes you will see some procurement, they will say they are not in charge of that contractor because this job has been outsourced, so they don't deal with them. No, you need to deal with them because they are part of what they are doing will affect or have impact. So you must be able to control it. That is why the term externally provided services is now being used. So for this expanded scope for external provided products and services, chemical suppliers, fish leasing providers, waste, all these are in the guidance for use under the annex guidance for use. The waste haulers and contractors, contractor maintenance companies, logistic and distribution partners, any supplier affecting environmental performance. So all this issue of we have outsourced it. It's nothing like that again. We want you to be able to control it. So it's part of your process, and that is what it is now. Then required action. Review supplier population against the EMS outcome. Who are your suppliers, and review their requirements and see that they align with international best practices. You must include environmental compliance into the requirement before you start engaging suppliers now. You must document any relevant determination, then define type and extent of control applied. What's the level of control that you have for this contractor? For example, if you're engaging a contractor, the technicality is left to them, but if they are generating waste, you must have control on how they manage their waste. Because when they generate waste, it still applies to you as an organization. Update procurement and terms and control, like I mentioned, then revise supplier questionnaires for your suppliers and leverage existing controls for ISO 9001. I've already said this, or I've already mentioned this. The existing standard is already clear. For ISO 9001, if you have already implemented ISO 9001 in your organization, and you implemented 6.3 very well, then this will not be a problem. Then 8.2, emergency preparedness and response. What do you need to do? If you look at the earlier version, under emergency response, it made reference. Now, like I have told you from the beginning of this class, the ISO standard is a fluid process. It's not a waterfall approach. It's a fluid process. It works together. Every clause applies to themselves, just like the way your body, your excretory system, your digestive system, your respiratory system, your endocrine system, every part of the body works, relate, interact together. And because of that interaction with themselves, it is very important that they communicate and connect. So in the other standard, it also applies there. For example, now I've given many examples. I've told us that clause 6.1 relates to clause 4.1. Clause objective 2, clause 6.2 relates to policy 5.2. You see it there. I said the policy must set the framework for setting objective, and your objective must align with your policy. Many of these requirements work together like that. They are integrated. In your operation under clause 8, there can be changes that you now come down to clause 6 to see how to manage your changes. Roles and responsibilities is based on competence. That's why clause 7.2 relates to clause 5.3. So in the full class, in our full ISO class, we give this detailed explanation that every of our delegates understand this thing simply. There is a flow of this standard. So now when you look at clause 8.2, it made reference to clause 6.1 in the earlier version. Why? Because when you are paying for emergency, the kind of emergency that you prepare for is based on the kind of risk that you have identified, based on the kind of risk that you know. And your risk is based on the kind of context, what you do in your organization. So in emergency response, it said that when you are planning for emergency, you need to look at your clause 6.1 to understand the kind of environmental risk that will tell you the kind of emergency that you prepare for. If you are into compressed gas, you have a lot of compressed gas, you must consider leakage, gas leakage as an emergency. If you're in the oil and gas and you stop fuels, or you discharge, or you unload or offload, you must consider spillage as an environmental aspect. Because your clause 6 have already identified those risks, then in clause 8.2, you are now putting plan in place to address, to plan for emergency. That's what's up. That's what we are talking about. So now, but now in the new version, it now says that instead of looking at clause 6.1.1, you now look at what? Clause 6.1.2. As simple as that. That is the difference. Your focus now will now be on clause 6. Your focus will now be on clause 6.1.2. What's this? I see. Your focus now will now be on clause 6.1.2. And I'm talking about the new version. So when you look at clause 8, I'm trying to open clause 8 for you now. You will see it there, like I said from the beginning of the class, you must have opened your standard. If you look at clause 6.2, clause 8.2, it says that the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain the processes needed to prepare for the response, needed to prepare for and respond to the potential emergency situation determined in 6.1.2. You can see. But in the earlier version, it made reference to what? 6.1.1. That is the difference there. So now it's telling us that we need to, in fact, the earlier version, it made reference to 6.1 and 6.2. Sorry, 6.1.2, I mean to say, I was reading 8.1. It made reference to 6.1.1, but now it is now making reference to 6.1.2, meaning that your focus now should be on the environmental aspects. Because clause 6.1.2 is talking about what? It's talking about environmental aspects. Can somebody write environmental aspect in the chat room? Can somebody write environmental aspect in the chat room? So now the focus is now on 6.1.2 when you're planning for emergency. Who is writing? Clause 8.2 now focus on environmental aspects. Clause 6.1.2. So you need to update your document, your procedure. There is no substantial content change. It's just for you to do the structural adjustment and reference to clause 6.1, clause 6.1.2. Emergency planning must now consider supplier-related risk. All your suppliers have gone to an audit before that they have vendors or supplier that supply them diesel, and they were telling us in the audit that is the supplier that created the spill in your facility, and I think that doesn't concern you. What kind of thing? If the fire happened on their truck while they are discharging, which company will it burn? That is why we need to change the understanding from just outsourcing to externally provided products and services. So there must now be consideration of supply-related risk from your supplier, spills, contractor accident, supply chain disruption. These are for scanning. This is, please open your phone, go to your camera or scanner, whatever you can use, to scan this to access the assessments. To access the assessment, you can open it down while we are in class. You can open it. What you will click on, there are two this thing there. I've also dropped it in the comment section. Click on it. Click on it. If you have clicked on it, please type yes in the chat room. If you have clicked on it, type yes in the chat room. Okay. I'm also trying to click on it so that I can guide us properly. It's not loading from your end. Maybe it's your network, or you wait a bit. If it has opened, type yes in the chat room. Okay. Okay, I understand. I understand what is happening. It's like because we are all doing it at the same time. So let us calm down. Let us calm down. I think I understand what is happening. I think there is a limit to the number of persons that can go at a time. Okay, but ensure that you save the link. Please save the link. Save the link. You can still do it later. Save the link. You can do it later while I communicate with the IT team. For those that have opened it, just keep it open. I think it's because we are all entering at the same time. We are going to sort that. Just ensure that you save the link. Ensure that you save the link, please. If just save the link, you can still be able to do it later. So what is happening now is that it is saying that resource limit is reached, meaning that there is a maximum number of persons that can take the assessment at a time. Please just help us exercise patience while we address it. Like I said, keep the link, and you will still be able to do it later. I'm giving us more time for us to copy and paste the link. You can copy the link from the chat room, or just scan this, screenshot this, or copy the link and drop it somewhere, maybe in your note, in your Samsung note or iPhone note, or somewhere in your WhatsApp. Please, the link has been dropped in the group already. Please, sorry, in the chat room. Please check the chat room because we need to continue this class. I don't understand your question. Which should I click? I said the link is in the chat room. Check the chat room now. I dropped the link in the chat room earlier. I dropped it in the chat room. It has, I think it has gone up. Let me click. Let me paste it again. I'll paste the link again. Let me see. Okay, I can't pin it. There's no way I can pin it. But I'll paste the link again, please. I've repasted it to. I've repasted the link. Can we move on? So that we'll move to the next stage. Thank you, everyone. Please help me to repaste the link while we move on. Thank you. If you are in the YouTube channel, please help us to copy and paste in the YouTube channel too. If you are watching on YouTube, help us to paste it on YouTube. Help us to paste it on YouTube. I don't know why it's not copying. Yes, you click on open assessment. Click on open. If you have been able to do it, please click on open assessment. Please click on open assessment. Help us to drop the link on the WhatsApp, on the chat, in the chat room, in the comment section. If you are on YouTube, please ensure that you are subscribing, because these are part of what we use to know that you are actually in class with us. Let's keep it coming. All right, we have 83 people watching. What we did was that we want to make the process flawless. Instead of generating certificate manually, we have created a process that after the whole thing, you will just automatically get a certificate. And henceforth, for all our webinars, for major trainings like this, we'll be issuing certificates. And I think it's a new process. At least this is the 98th webinar. And for a 98th webinar, we should be advancing every time. And I think I'm glad that we are achieving this feat. So let's move on. So now, like I said, in clause 9, we are moving on now. In clause 9, please, those on YouTube, please help us to just look at. I've already shared the link already. Please, I've shared the link already with us. Yes, just wait for some time. Graduate, because we all went in together at the same time. That was the reason why the website was scared. So let us be patient. So now, like we are saying, another new change that occur, a new requirement, is that objective must be defined. Now, in the earlier version of clause 9.2, 9.2 is internal audit. In 9.2.2, when it comes to internal audit, it was just the scope and the criteria that was mentioned in the earlier version. But now, in the new version, it is clearly stated that you must set the objective. And your documentation must include audit program, evidence of your audit result. You can't tell me that you do audit and you don't tell us, you don't give us the result of the audit, which is the audit report, and result, the outcome from the audit, which is in the earlier version too. So in the earlier version, it was just criteria and scope that was there, but now criteria, scope, and objective has been included. Objective is also a new requirement that has been included. Thank you, Mr. Thank you, sir. Engineer Abiodun. Thank you, sir. Then documented information must be audit program, must include audit program evidence, then evidence of implementation of audit program, Then update audit planning template to include objective. Before, under the ISO 14001 standard, objective was not included. It was now saying now that you must set objective for your audit. Audit objective must be included. Why are you doing an audit? What's the reason behind this particular audit? If you want to understand about auditing, you need to join our audit our ISO class, any of the ISO classes. Though we are having a IMS, Integrated Management System Lead Auditor course in June, a weekend class that is much more relaxing, and you have the whole week to study. So we have a weekend class for the IMS class in June, and we also have ISO 9001 coming up upper week. Then we have ISO 22000 full safety. If you're into full safety, ISO 22000 lead auditor course is starting next week. And if you are joining us via this class for the individual ones, 9001 and 22,000, instead of paying 200,000 for QMSAI, you'll be paying 180,000. And instead of paying if you want exemplar global certificate, instead of paying 400, you'll be paying 360,000 naira. So that's what I'll be doing for us as bonanza. If you want to join our ISO classes, we have 22,000 full safety coming up next week Tuesday, and 9001 coming up on starting upper week. Yes, for the 9001. For the IMS class is starting on June 13, and that will be a weekend class. And if you are interested, you can let me know for that too. We have discounts for you also. So just let me know. Just chat me up. If you don't have my contact, I'm going to drop that in the chat room as we go on in this class. So like I was saying, you need to understand auditing, because auditing is a separate class on its own. How to carry out audit planning, audit scheduling, how to carry out interview during audit. All of these are part of what we are talking about. Then clause 9.3, like I said earlier, it is just separation into the subclauses. It was just a standalone. It was just written straight up together before, but now we now have it as 9.1, 9.2, and 9.3, but the same requirement. Mr. Franklin, okay, Mr. Franklin, can you just are you saying that I should copy the number? Please ignore the exam time. You should not be asking you for exam time. You should not be asking you for exam time. That's one of the reasons why I posted it here, so that I will know if there are any challenges. But you should not be asking you for exam time. You should not be asking you for exam time, but let's go on. We will sort it later. That is one of the reasons why I will start it. I've started it so I will know if there are any challenges while we go on. This is the first time we are test running it. So now let's go on. Then we said, I've already explained 9.3 already. The same requirement, just that they are put it into separate clauses. That is just the difference. Impact update management requirement. Please don't get me distracted. Your comment that is not focused on this class is distracting me. I can't be in the class and still be answering you. Please let me focus. Once we are done, we are going to sort all these things. Please let us focus. Let us focus, please. You are distracting me with your question. We are still in a class. Once we are done, then I'll be solving these issues one after the other. So clause 9.1, evaluation of environmental performance, which is explicit requirement to evaluate environmental performance and EMS effectiveness. This requirement is now very clear about looking at what are your performance. What is your performance like? What are your environmental aspects? How are you monitoring it? Why are you meeting up with your requirements? How are you performing when it comes to reduce, for example, you set emission, CO2 emission range. Are you meeting up with that target? Are you promoting environmental sustainability? What is the impact? And what are you monitoring and what are you measuring? Your performance is very, very important at the end of the day, because when you don't meet up with your established performance, it means that you are not doing the right thing. Then the monitor and measure plan should include analysis approach by indicator. There must be a way that you monitor your process in such a way that you are able to understand what are the units that are using for measurement. Analysis by indicator, then documented information must be available, evidence of implementation, not necessarily formal standalone procedure. Then link evaluation results directly to continual improvement. Link it directly to continual improvement, which is your clause 10 and management review input, which is 9.2, 9.3.2. These are also in the earlier version, where your output from your performance evaluation, from your monitoring, 9.1, monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation, which I have explained before. Your daily measurement, your daily monitoring, your MMAE, monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation. All these things that you mention on a regular basis, there should be results for it. Are there times that you exceeded maybe the emission level, the noise level, the air quality level? What do you do at the end of the day? How do you improve to get better with environmental performance? Then clause 10, I've already explained this already too. I said clause 10 it now has 2 clauses instead of 3. Before it was 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, but now it is just 10.1 and 10.2. So they brought 10.3, which is continual improvement. In the earlier version, they just brought it to 10.1 as continual improvement. Then we now have 10.2 that talks about non-conformity and corrective action. So there are 2 consolidated courses in this one, and this one starts with improvement. Clause 10.1 now starts with improvement instead of the general statement. So it's clearly linked between 9.1, between your findings in clause 9. Remember that your clause 9 is about performance evaluation. So your output from your clause 9 now becomes your input in your continuous improvement, because whatever you have come up with when you are monitoring, whatever you came up with in your check phase, in your performance evaluation phase, is now what you'll be acting upon to improve in your environmental management system. So in 10.1, we now have the organization shall continually improve the sustainability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the EMS to enhance environmental performance by determining opportunities for improvement based on clause 9 and based on clause 10.2. So your output from your clause 10.2, from your clause 9.2, from your monitoring, from your daily monitoring, what you observe, what you saw when you exceed your expected target, from your internal audit, from your management review, becomes your input in your 10.1, and that's what you now have used to address by carrying out what's it called, corrective action, non-conformity assessment, carrying out the non-conformity report, and coming up with corrective action to address these changes. Then we talk about life cycle perspective, which I've already talked about. At each stage of your process, environmental aspect must be considered. From where you acquire raw material, from your designing, to your production, to your manufacturing, to your transportation, to your delivery, to the use of that product, to the end of life treatment, to the final disposal, you must consider life cycle perspective. That is what's up. That's what we are talking about. You must be able to consider how does it affect the environment. What are the environmental aspects and what are the impacts? So in the new requirement, you must clearly actively apply life cycle thinking, not just consider it. You must apply it. You know, when you go for something, maybe you go for an interview, and they tell you that we will consider it. We consider it either yes or no. I will consider it. It's still yes or no. But in the new standard, you must apply it. Scope must reflect authority and ability to control and influence your life cycle. You must be able to control your life cycle perspective for your processes. And that's even the reason why we now change the outsource to externally provided process and services, because we want you to have control over it. And not just believe that particular area does not apply to you. You are into production, but you now outsource the delivery to some delivery agent. Now say that it doesn't concern you again. No, it concerns you. That's what we are talking about. You must include upstream impact. Upstream is talking about getting your raw material, how you got your raw material, how they got it delivered to you, whether they use truck or they walk down, or they use a diesel forklift or a diesel truck, or they use gas power truck, or whatever they use to deliver it to you. You must consider it. how they supply your material, to the downstream, to your waste, to your disposal, to your customer use, to your delivery of your own product at the end of the day. Normal and abnormal condition must be evaluated and emergency situation separated from abnormal operations. Evidence required. Your product and services record showing environmental criteria. When you are designing your product and services, do you put environmental consideration into it? You are developing a particular gadget or a particular appliance. Maybe your company is into appliance, they are producing an electrical appliance. Did they consider environmental criteria into how people can use it with little or no, with lesser energy? That's what the standard is talking about. How for your product, when you are designing it, do you consider that let us make this product, let us make this particular product that we are doing, let us make it more environmentally compliant, or even your services. Oh, when we are delivering our services, let us do something that are more environmentally sustainable. Or even maybe your outfit, maybe during December period, you want to go and buy jerseys, clothes that I want to sew for your staff. Now, okay, when you are going to buy this clothes, consider the clothes that are made of pure cotton, for example, or more material that is environmental eco-friendly than those that are not eco-friendly. Because even cotton requires, it's also an environmental aspect, because when the process of producing cotton and using cotton to make clothes also goes through a lot of stages. Please, can we wait on this thing and let us complete the class? Can we please wait? All right, let's go on. Like we're saying, product design require showing environmental criteria. I've explained that. Procurement document with environmental requirement. I just explained that too. Then supplier communication record, evidence that you are communicating with your suppliers. Evidence that you have communicated with your suppliers. Then environmental asset register covering all life cycle stages. Then risk assessment including supply chain and downstream impact. Then normal life cycle procedure required, but evidence must exist. You must ensure that you have a procedure for your life cycle. Carry out risk assessment, including your supply chain and your downstream activities, your downstream impact of your processes. So practical steps, start with your biggest environmental aspects. Don't rush the process. Start with the biggest one, your major environmental aspect that you can have. You do not need to complete everything. Start one step at a time. Document how your life cycle thinking informed your most significant aspect and expand from there. So now, based on what we have discussed about since morning, what are those that have high priority? Number one, the context analysis for clause 4, your biodiversity, your pollution levels, resource availability, resource use, all these things must be put into consideration, natural resource use. Then create a management change process, 6.3, their priority. Then restructure your risk register. Before it stopped at 6.1.4, but now we now have 6.1.5, while deliberately having a separate subclause for environmental asset and impact, which I've explained. Then update supplier control to externally provided language instead of using outsource. Then add audit objective to your audit criteria. Before we said to your audit template, before we said it's only criteria and scope that are in the audit objective. But now you must include objective in your audit template, in your auditing activity. Then your management review now has three subclauses: 9.3.1, 9.3.2, and 9.3.3. Then update emergency procedure cross-reference. That is 6.1.1 and 6.1.2. Then those that are of medium priority. Your manual, if you are using an EMS manual, you need to renumber it. And if you are following the strict structure numbering of the standard, you need to now renumber your own to suit the ISO standard. Then the environmental policy should include climate change, biodiversity commitment, Then your tracer parties too, you must verify trace to the EMS. Like talk about this plus 4.2. You must consider, you must look at their needs when it comes to climate change and biodiversity and the likes. Aspect register, confirming normal and abnormal conditions. Then your supplier questionnaire should be expanded, should include issue of environmental sustainability. Then your monitoring plan should analyze approach by indicator, then training materials, your updated version reference. Then the one that can wait, that will still take a longer time, or you can do it gradually. Compliance obligation register, you can still work with that with time. Communication procedure, documented control available as terminology, non-conformity procedure, that is minor vocabulary refresh, then continual improvement and reference for interpretation. These are just the differences. So we have two more slides to go and we are done with today's section. So now what we are saying here is the mind shift. Auditors will, as an auditor, what do you need to do now? Auditors will now focus, now expect to proactively to see proactive evidence of climate change. We want to see that you are considering climate change in your processes, biodiversity, and climate and life cycle thinking, not just reactive compliance records. Internal audit focus area. When it comes to internal audit, your objective must be included, like I said. It must include objective. You must treat clause 6.1.4 and 6.1.5 as separate clauses, like I've explained. Evidence of management of change management, planning for changes, that is 6.3. Then covering of life cycle perspective, full one. Then changing of outsource to external provider service, and you must control your external providers, not just changing names. You must now have control over your external providers. Then management review restructuring from 9.3.1, 9.3.2, and 9.3.3. Then we have external and certification audit focus. Policies will be focused, as an auditor, now focus on their policy to include climate change and biodiversity. Context analysis covering all environmental aspects and impact, environmental factors. Life cycle thinking must be active, not just considered or not just documented. You must consider life cycle thinking in all your processes and what you do. Then there must be proper change management that must exist and must be in use. And then supplier controls, like I've mentioned. Then improve link to clause 9 findings in your continuous improvement. So most times what you can be seeing is that if you start auditing these days now, you start seeing that there might be missing change management process. This is the only genuine new clause that you have in the standard that is separate, that is new completely. Then environmental policy missing climate change and biodiversity can also be an issue that you be coming across as an auditor. Then aspect register lacking life cycle perspective, or only covering their own operations only, without thinking of the life, not just about operation. We produce manufacturing. No, the end of life use must be considered. The manufacturing process must be considered. The procurement process, the acquisition of raw materials, that is life cycle perspective, must be considered in your environmental management system. The internal audit must include objective, like I mentioned, and structuring of your management review. Then on a final note, summary and key takeaways. 5 key takeaways for your organization. The standard is not a full rewrite. It's not just something that is just new things completely. No, it's just consolidation amendment of consolidated amendment. Consolidated amendment. It's not a new standard. It covers. It's still the core requirements are still there. The life cycle thinking is now very much active, and you must think across life cycle perspective at all times. You must document how it influenced your most significant aspects, expand it over time, continue to update it and work on it. It's not something that you just do once and that is all. It's something that you continuously improve upon. The clause 6.3 is now the only new clause that is new, that creates a simpler change management process. Then supplier control bodies to externally provided services and not just outsource. Review your procurement, review your contract document, your procurement requirement procedures, and your questionnaires for your contractors and your suppliers and your vendors. Then the transition window is still 3 years. Plan now, don't panic, take your step at a time, take your time, and ensure that you update and review and improve in your environmental management system in line with the new version of the ISO 14001, which is what? ISO 14001 2026. If you have a mature system, you are already close already. Then recommended resources. I have a copy of the standard and the new version and the old version and the amended climate change amendment. You can also have a copy of I have a document also how the transition arrangement and the guidance for use and other documents that can come from other certification bodies, accreditation bodies, that can just go through all those documents that you see online and study them and be able to implement and improve in your process. This is a recommended next step gap that I'm recommending. It's not compulsory. Number one, you can create a checklist, gap analysis against this presentation checklist, carry out a gap analysis of your processes, look at what you have, look at what the standard says, the new standard says, and carry out the gap analysis. Then you develop a change management process, 6.3. That's the new requirement. You are ensure that you develop it. But if you already have it already in 9001, you have implemented it, you just need to integrate that what you have in 9001 into environmental management system and look at it through the lens of environmental management system. Just integration. Update your policy to include the environmental aspect. Update your aspect register and supplier controls. Controlling your suppliers, like we have said, you must control your suppliers because it is now what? Externally provided services. Then restructure audit templates. Restructure your audit templates. Restructure your audit templates and management review. Carry out management review. Restructure your audit template as much as you can. Then train your staff on new terminologies and expectations and the new requirements. You can also invite us to carry out a transition training for your staff, for your colleagues, or for your organization, and monitor your transition deadline updates from your certification body if you are with your organization. And I hope today has been very impactful. I hope you've been able to learn one or two things, and I hope we've been able to go through the details of what we are talking about today, talking about integrating this new requirement into the standard and looking at the various changes that has occurred in this new standard. So discussion topics. Before that, I think it's good that we end